Hola.
Oh.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. This is our last dialogue today. And yeah, it's been a very intensive week for me and for my voice. I completely lost my voice yesterday night. Thank you, everybody, for being so nice in our festival. So let's start saying a big thank you to all the participants here. During these days, many of us argued that degrowth and ecological economics community have the responsibility not only to produce knowledge, academic knowledge, to provide analysis, diagnosis of what is wrong with the present economic paradigm, but also to suggest alternative paths, right? Many say that we need to govern this transition. This would require, as we claim many times at the very beginning of this conference, a new way to frame technology, but also science. From a capitalist-driven activity that is destroying the planet and destroying our life, destroying non-human life, to an instrument at the service of people. Today we have two great scientists with us. Both have background in physics. Both are in different ways focusing on climate change. The first one is Carlo Buontempo. I promise not to make jokes on his surname, right? That in Italian, but actually I'm making jokes. In Italian means good weather. So thank you very much for this. And it's very funny because we've been friends since a long time. And when I was depressed at the beginning of this week with the terrible weather, my mom say, "Ask Carlo." Yeah? So Carlo is the director of the Copernicus Climate Change Service, the C3S, which is implemented by the European Center for the Medium Range Weather Forecast. So it has to do with weather forecast as well. He has a PhD in physics. He worked in many different places, from Canada to the Met Office, where I met him when I was doing my PhD in Exeter. He will talk more about his work. And here on my right, there is Professor Julia Steinberger, which is a very well-known academic that I would also say activist, no? In the degrowth. I think so. She's professor of societal challenges of climate change at the University of Lausanne since 2020. She also organized one of the European Society for Ecological Economics together with other people and leads done. Yeah, so the objective of today, I have two main objectives and goals for this dialogue. The first one is to present the state of the art of climate change research by one of the leading figures in Europe and one of the leading institutes, which is the Copernicus. So for me, it's an honor to have Carlo here. And the second big objective for me is to give the possibility to Julia to speak about one of the gems, I think, of Degrowth, which is the project REAL that was approved by the European Research Council last year. So to try to reflect with her of how degrowth can be a solution to mitigate, to adapt, to address the climate change challenge. So I will start with Carlo. I would like you to briefly introduce, I know that you have prepared some speech. So as starting point, I will start with this reflection to acknowledge that we no longer live in a world in which humans have evolved. The planet has drastically changed, especially probably in the last 70 years. No, maybe in the last couple of centuries, but there was like a big acceleration in the last century. We need to take into account the information about how climate and environment are changing now to mitigate, adapt to a new world. So this is crucial to design a post-growth society. So Carlo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mario, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. So thank you to you personally, but to all the organizing committee for this event. You promised to make no jokes about my last name, and so I will need to find a way of fighting back at some point, but for now, I let it go. And has been challenging for me because this has been probably the busiest, or certainly the busiest week of the year. I wasn't here, I was in Brussels, and one of the busiest of my professional life. But I wouldn't have missed this opportunity at all. So I was very, very, very keen to be here. One of the reasons why it was so busy was that in Brussels this week we had the General Assembly of the Copernicus Climate Change Service. And as we do in these occasions, we invited the local politicians to come and give a welcome speech. And this time was the Secretary of State in Belgium, Mr. Dermine, who came and opened the session. And it was a very interesting speech, the one he gave, because he started with a formal and a bit protocolar speech about the importance of climate. And then at some point, he dropped the piece of paper and just spoke his heart. And he spoke about the election that his coalition that had a very green agenda lost. And he stressed one point, and the point was about communication. It was about not speaking to the convert, but speaking to a different crowd, speak to the people who actually disagree with us or with him. And so in that sense, I think it's important for me to be here, because you are not my usual crowd, if I can say. And that's great. I don't know almost anyone here. And even the language you speak is a language I'm not familiar with, which is great. As any new language, you have to learn, and I learned STS, and I learned is not the Scottish Tartan Society, or not even the Space Tourism Society, and if you want, you can Google it. They both exist, so it's something for me to learn. But I lead the Copernicus Climate Change Service, as Mario said, and this is one of the 6 services in which the Copernicus program is structured. So the Copernicus program is a technological, quite rich program of the European Union, and is a program devoted to Earth observation from satellite. There is one part that is the satellite component, and there is one part that is the service component, and I lead the climate change part. And in a sense, it's all about providing information on the status of the climate and its evolution in time as a public good. And this is really the important element. And I can speak here for hours about our models, our satellite and the supercomputers and so on, but that's not the audience. That would be my audience. And in a sense, it will be about the how of what we do. In a sense, instead, I would like to speak about the why and the goal of the program and some of the outcomes, as you were saying. Considering your passion and your interest, maybe it's just useful to stress that this is a public-funded program, is funded by the European Commission, and is scrutinized by the member state to whom we report quarterly. So in a sense, in terms of, it cannot be, is a user-driven program, and the member state elected representative have a say in how we run the service and how we implement it. And in a sense, we can say that our program is what provides the world with the pulse on the climate. One of the reasons this has been one of the busiest months, if not the busiest month, was that at the beginning of this month, Antonio Guterres the Secretary General of the United Nations, made a speech about the need to find an exit ramp from the highway to climate hell. And Guterres is quite, is known to use this very strong metaphor. And I'm not always comfortable with this metaphor, but I'm pleased to say that the statement he made were based on the data that we made available openly and freely. And I'm even more proud to say that anyone else who could have made such a statement or who would be interested in this could do the same, because all we do is open and free and scrutinizable and open source. And I think this is really, really, really important. So the first evidence I want to bring here to answer your question, and if we have the slide, I can try to see the slide. I can do even without slides. There you are. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mario. The first evidence I want to show today is this plot. This plot shows the evolution of the global mean temperature with respect to the pre-industrial climate. And we call the pre-industrial climate the climate of the last 50 years of the 19th century. So the color you see underneath all this wiggly line, these represent the anomalies of each year since the 1940s. And you see they are getting redder and redder as they go towards the top. And the one you see on the top represent the last 12 months. So the last 12 months from June last year until May this year have been the warmest 12 months that we have recorded. And these are not model runs. These are not estimation or strange calculation. These are observations. And on the basis of these observations, we can say with strong certainty that we have never lived as a human being in a climate this warm. But I think we can say something more, and Mario was introducing it in this respect. In all likelihood, we have never lived in a climate this warm in our civilization. This means that cities, the concept of money, economy, agriculture, have never faced a climate this warm. And at time we think about climate change as something that will happen, that will affect the economy, that will change our habit. Well, I want one fact to be absolutely clear. Climate change is here and is already fundamentally, the climate we are experiencing now is already fundamentally different from the climate our civilization has developed and has thrived in. This,
down.
The other one. Oh, the one on the side. There you are. The second point I want to make is that this shift in climate is not affecting only temperature, but is affecting a large set of variable systems and feedbacks in the human, environmental, economical nexus that we inhabit. The example, I mean, I'm simple-minded, I'm a physicist after all, but the example here is about ice mass in the glaciers. And the fact that the unit of measurement is cubit or hundreds of cubic kilometers of ice loss just give you a sense of how dramatic the shift has been. And over just 2 years, from 2022 to 2023, in Europe, on the Alps, we lost 10% of the volume. Those are a huge variation. And these are affecting the climate itself, but affecting the ecosystem, are affecting the local traditions, the economy, and so on and so forth. And once more, I want to stress, these are not models or extrapolations. These are observations. Now, you guide me. Is this one on the side?
No.
Is the one down?
Yeah.
OK, good. Thank you. Oh, it doesn't like me, huh? The third point I want to make is about our ignorance. Because at the end of the day, we are scientists. And we do this work because we don't know things. And I would like to celebrate our ignorance, because it has been the main driver for science. And we don't understand everything. And there is a nice example, nice or worrying example. So what you see in this case is the evolution of the sea ice around Antarctica that we have seen last year. Antarctica was this continent where climate change was not so noticeable, and sea ice concentration stayed largely constant over the last few decades. Well, last year we lost in some months up to 13%, 30 of the standard extent of sea ice. And I mention this because while there are theory and discussion, and while we do understand some of the processes, we don't understand entirely why it happened last year, why it was so big. And I think it's important. It's important as climate scientists, it's important for informing the political discussion that we stress the fact that we don't know everything. But we do know something. And this, and this points to this plot. And I often say that this is probably the scariest plot I know. So this depicts the rise in the sea level over the period, more or less, when I was at university as a student up until now. And if there is something worth noticing in this plot, is the fact that there are very little variations. There's a steady, almost monotonic increase in the sea level. And it's scary because it is unstoppable. There is a committed sea level that will continue in all likelihood, not just for the next few years, but in all likelihood for the next few centuries. But at the same time, this points to an element that I think is important, and is an important point of reflection in my mind, and it's the fact that we may not be able, and I'm sure some of you think otherwise, but we may not be able to predict the GDP next year or where the next conflict will take place, but we can predict with very high certainty that the sea level will be higher. That will be 3 millimeters taller next year than it was this year. So, notwithstanding our ignorance, the one I was celebrating before, and the fact that we need to do more research to understand the things we don't understand, there is plenty of useful data, information, and knowledge that we can use to live in a climate, in a world that is already fundamentally different from the world we used to. And this has consequences, practical consequences. So the government on Indonesia is considering moving their capital because Jakarta is basically undefensible to flooding. So these are massive, massive change. So if you think about in that period of time, 3 millimeters of it, 3 millimeters, it sums up to start something around 10 centimeters of sea level, which is a huge change in terms of risk for infrastructure. So I'm just getting to the end, but I want to close with this. This is our report, a report that we publish every year. This year has been published jointly with the World Meteorological Organization of the United Nations, and is an attempt to make sense of this information we have about the climate, to take stock about the climate in Europe, and provide this information in a way that is easy to understand and easy to use. So I want maybe to close on an element that is a natural connection with the degrowth and this holistic approach to knowledge, music, science, and technology. And it is the cover page of the State of the Climate. And what you see is a piece of art with these flowers. But at the same time, this piece of art is also a graphical representation of the changing climate. So each flower represents a decade. Each petal represents a year. And the color of each petal represents how much the climate has warmed with respect to pre-industrial. And we are now at the beginning of the 2020s, and you see this petal getting really red. I just want to acknowledge the work of Anna Lombardi and Samantha Burgess and the rest of the climate intelligence team, and Rebecca Emerton, who have been the driving forces behind this report. And I think these represent maybe a point of reflection, because whichever economic model we may decide to go for or think about in the future, we'll still have to grapple with a climate that is fundamentally different and is changing very rapidly, and we'll need information to deal with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo. Before giving the room to Julia, I want to say something. I think that we as a community of degrowth must be extremely proud, because we are no longer the crazy guys, the crazy people in the room looking for funding. We already got some few number of ERC, the European Research Council, legitimizing our work. And having Julia here and other people in the room, it's a proof that our work is being increasingly important and the center of the European agency funding. So, Julia, the floor is yours.
So, thank you so much. Thanks, Mario. And I should say one of the things, I spent roughly about 10 years of my life failing to get grants, and some of you accompanied me on those adventures. And one of the things that was really surprising in terms of, that was very nice in terms of finally being able to get some grants and get some funding, for me that started with the Living Well Within Limits project, which was funded by Leverhulme at the University of Leeds, was that we were starting to do it together as a very collaborative process, and a lot of people helping out. And I really want to commend Mario, who actually helped us, so Jason, Yorgos, and myself. We were really part of a group of people. We were really supported by a community, and it's something that we intend to pay forward. So anybody who is a junior career or mid-career researcher here who wants to learn what it takes, what such a thing looks like, we want to help you. And I think that that's something that we have to take very seriously, is that we want this to be a collaborative community. One of the things we decided to do, we had this interview, the ERC process, they never leave you alone, they will ruin your summers. You should still go for it. But we knew that they were going to ask us a question that they ask everybody, which is, who are your competitors? And we decided we did not want to put up with this bullshit anymore. So we decided that we wanted to answer, we only have collaborators. And some of our best collaborators that we really enjoy to work with are these people. And they still gave us the money. So, okay. You can't see a darn thing. That's just as well. Anyway, so we have this project. It's called REAL, a post-growth deal. And I'll say a few words about it. What I do want to say is that this is just one of many projects that is active in this space. And I want to commend people like Giuseppe Feola, who may or may not still be here, Mario here. I'm going to miss out people. Simone D'Alessandro has been very important. And the other ongoing projects that are huge. At the time when we wrote the project, we thought, you know, we had no chance in hell of getting it, probably. And we also were able to say, we never think that the European Horizon Project will fund this, so hello, this is your only chance. The very next year, the European Horizon Call had degrowth as a topic. And as a result, we have other projects here, including MAPS, to be merged. There's others. I am lost in the acronyms. So we are starting to be a reasonable contender, and maybe one of the challenges is how we work well together. So now I'll speak a bit more about REAL itself. So the two co-PIs are Yorgos Kallis and Jason Hickel, both in Barcelona, and then myself at the University of Lausanne. We're very much focused on certain aspect of what we thought would be important to realize post-growth. We have a part that's sort of more empirical that we called possibilities, where we're looking at mapping out unequal exchange, for instance, and global trade flows, for instance, in labor. So congratulations to Sergio, who got one of the paper prizes here. Not just that, but he only started his PhD in November, so that's pretty impressive. So we're mapping out some of these things, and other people who are working on that are, for instance, Morena, Megna, Omer, and other lovely folk around the room. We're also going to be working on trying to understand how we do delinking. So how we try to not just map out unequal exchange, but also resolve it through post-growth policies. And that's really important work that's being led mainly by Jason Hickel at the University of Barcelona, where we really stop saying degrowth is only for the global north. Please don't ask us questions about the global south. But we start resolving this question of how we move away from growth and towards better conditions for everybody across the world, and in collaboration with our colleagues in the global south as well. So I think that that's kind of exciting. One of the second things we want to do is we want to look at scenarios and modeling, and we want to try to look at international. Oh, yeah. Well, it's not. The slides don't necessarily follow. Okay. This is the real team at our meeting in whenever it was November in Montpellier, and it's starting to be a large number of people. Quite a few of them are here, so it's quite lovely, just and amazing to be able to work with these people. So another one of the things that we want to try to do is look at post-growth climate mitigation scenario models and scenarios internationally, and we want to focus on certain things like north-south convergence. We want to look at inequality within countries as well as between countries. We want to look at higher resolution in well-being and need satisfaction, so not what happens now, which is use GDP as a proxy for well-being. And in terms of production, well, in terms of consumption, we'd like to be able to drill down to demand in terms of energy and material services delivered and their distribution to people and how that links to need satisfaction. I think that would be really important. I think a lot of the existing IPCC models, the climate models are great on the physical science side. On the socioeconomic side, they're terrible, broadly speaking, present company accepted. But one of the ways in which they're really deficient is the demand side. There's very little resolution on demand. There's just like a whole bunch of sort of national or even regional averages, and you don't really quite know where the energy is going, what's happening to it. And so from a degrowth, post-growth perspective, we have to take demand and what happens to it a lot more seriously. So that's quite important. On the production side, we want to be able to model sectors and structural change within the production, because we do not believe that just having general transport or general energy or general whatever cuts the mustard. We actually really have to think about where those production processes are happening, what they're oriented towards, and really make sure that the production and the consumption side match up in order to be able to do things like degrowth and resource use and sufficiency. So that's quite important as well. And again, that's something that's not really happening. I think there are two people either in the audience or who've been at the conference who are really sort of pioneers in pushing the existing models as far as possible. So I just want to, who are not part of the REAL project, I just want to commend the work of Jarmo Kikstra and Mingyu Li, who have really been taking the existing models as far as they can possibly go in this direction. I think that we're very lucky to have such colleagues in our community as well. Another thing that we want to do in the project is we want to think a lot more about, to some extent, how society works. So we have an aspect that's on policies, provisioning, and politics. And one of the things that we really care about is this idea of economic democracy and how we can change decision-making at sort of different levels of the economy. So within provisioning systems, we don't think that economic democracy is one size fits all, and so we're going to try to take some of those ideas forward and try to also bring some of these ideas into practice. And for instance, Yorgos Kallis is particularly leading a whole research team on real existing degrowth, looking at existing cases, existing communities, and existing historical cases that we can really learn from and take forward. And a lot of the people in that group have been here and been making some amazing presentations. So I think that that's sort of it as far as some of the overview of where the REAL project is going. It's not doing everything. Other projects are doing other stuff, which is great. There's still a lot more room for research, as we know. I think one thing I would, I do have one more thing to say about the REAL project, which is, much like the next Degrowth and International Society for Ecological Economics, we now have a website. It only took us like a year. But it exists, so you can, and we made it colorful. We had to sort of struggle a little bit with the web designers sometimes. They wanted to make us look very corporate and professional. We said, no, bubble gum. Because we want to have the right, it might be the end of the world. Some of your graphs were really hard stopping, but we also want the right to have fun and work well together and not just be like, put ourselves in a presentation straitjacket. So that's a bit of what the website looks like, and hopefully as we go along, there will be more and more content in there. I just want to end with something in terms of maybe the activism or in terms of maybe where the community could be going. I think that one of the things there's some things that we're doing really well, and it's great that there's more and more of us and some really high quality research happening. I really don't want us to become complacent. I mean, we've seen from Carlo, we know from just looking around really, that things are going very badly politically, socially, and ecologically, that we're facing very bad times. And the fact that this community is growing and that we're able to do more and more of the scientific inquiry that we want to do should not lull us into a false sense of comfort. The hour is very late, and we're losing on every single front I can possibly think of, except possibly being in this tent together. And I think in order to take seriously the moment that we're in, we also have to take seriously our tactics and the type of research we do. I was shocked over the past few months to learn about the Atlas Network, which is something that, let's just show of hands, who knows about the Atlas Network in this tent? Okay, it's still less, I would say that's like a quarter. And it's something that we should have known about for decades. So they are the coalition of neoliberal think tanks that have been the main source of both neoliberal economic policy lobbying and climate denial and disinformation. And so we're facing, in our two communities, we're actually facing the same opposition, and we don't even know it. We're not even researching them properly. We're not even exposing them. We're not even sort of coordinating on this. If this is something you'd be interested in doing, please come talk to me. There's also the Climate Social Science Network that's doing a lot of this work, which is organized by my dear colleague Timmins Roberts at Brown University. So I think that we need to be taking a lot more seriously what we're up against, who we're up against, how they're organized, how they work, how they've been winning.
Thank you very much, Julia. Right? Can you hear me? No? Okay. And actually, this allow me to introduce a short question to you both before opening up the possibility to the public to make some questions. My feeling is that science is under attack, right? It's been under attack for a while, I guess. We have anti-vax, negationists of all sorts are intoxicating the debate about what is the role of science in our society, you know? And I was struck by the comments by Carlo saying that we are ignorant. Actually, we are ignorant, and this is a good thing, because the role of scientists is not to produce and suggest what is truth, but is to produce data and provide information to reduce, possibly manage uncertainty, right? But we, as a scientist, alone, we cannot provide political solution. So transition to post-growth society should be careful to avoid temptation of technocracy and ecofascism. And the recent case of geoengineering as a plan B to avoid climate disaster is an example, no, of how solutions surrounded by high uncertainty and huge risk can be reflexively promoted in the name of science and technology. So my question to you, and I ask you gently to answer in couple of minutes, if it's possible. What would be the interaction between science and society in a post-growth ideal society? So maybe we can start with Carlo.
Well, it's not an easy question to answer. I don't think I'm ignorant on that as well. But maybe there is a point of contact worth considering or starting our reflection on, and it's the fact that there might be a new way of generating knowledge on that interface between science and policy. And interestingly, that co-production that came in a number of sections here, and the inclusiveness and the bottom-up and so on, is something that in recent years has become more popular in climate circle. So this model of interface, like empty vessel of climate communication, I think is largely to our back, which is good. Now, how to do it in a way that works, I think is a question that we don't yet have an answer for. But if you think, for instance, about this developing world of digital twins, which offer the possibility of modeling the world and the different options we have in managing the world, I think that's a technology. And depending on how we govern that technology, and especially depending on how we build an engagement mechanism with the policymaker, with the community and society, in informing that decision in what to model, I think that can be used in one way or another. So for me, that's the key nexus that needs to be solved.
Thanks, Carlo. Your take on this?
So I think it's a really interesting question, and having been part of a couple of citizen assemblies, citizen juries, mainly in the UK, one of the things that's really interesting is how people who are just randomly taken from the population, quite a few of whom are climate deniers because they're exposed to social media. Like just how curious and genuinely wanting to know more people are. And I think that there's a real, that we're really missing a lot in terms of not just communicating science and the reality of our moment in all different disciplines, but also in neglecting how hungry people are for just being part of the conversation, being part of the discussion of how much we know and how much we don't know and where things are going. And you know, one of the really sort of most personally upsetting moments of my life was having just done a presentation where I used my 4-year-old's Lego blocks to show about emissions and stuff, and I really tried very hard for the communication. Anyway, so you know, I did this thing, and there were all the emissions and what's happening and the impacts and so on. And this woman stood up from the climate jury, and she said, "Why is this the first time I'm hearing about this?" And it's just like, that is just such a failure, right? So I think that we really need to be taking our fellow citizens much more seriously in terms of communication. And I think that we can also take them on board in terms of thinking about science, science funding, science priorities. So where do they want science and research to help them and inform their lives? In the US, one of the reasons, not a big reason, but one of the reasons the military budget is so big is because they fund all fundamental science. Right? The Pentagon just funds physics, math, chemistry, whatever, you name it. And that means that they're setting the priorities. And so I think that we should also be thinking about citizen science as also being like citizens get to think about where they want scientific priorities to happen and be part of that strategic decision. So I think that there's a lot more that we should be doing in terms of technology decisions. People are able to discuss and make decisions based on informed experts. What I think we need to teach a lot more about is because there are all these false experts floating around, in part funded by the Atlas Network, whose goal, by the way, one of the stated fundamental goals of the Atlas Network is to destroy the role of the university in society, which is, cheers, because what they want is they don't want democratic debate to be informed by public science. They want to present their fake expert with fake reports, fake knowledge, and sort of really muddy the waters in order for the free market to work for producers. So basically, producers to have free reign over our societies. And so they see universities as an obstacle. And so I think one of the things we need to educate people about is also about disinformation. It's about transparency. It's about how you can trust or distrust information. You know, what is a reasonable thing to say, like, okay, well, probably this scientist has a reasonable explanation, or probably maybe this is a bit more dodgy. You know, so I think that there's a lot more that we should be doing in terms of letting people know we can get things wrong, but you can trust us because if we get things wrong, we will tell you when we fuck up, right? Sorry. Like, in our job, we will tell you when we mess up. We have that role where we try our best, and if we mess up, we will tell you about it. And these other actors, they will never do that. So I think that there's also a lot of things that we need to do in order to help with rebuild the connections between public knowledge and everybody that we're supposed to serve.
Okay. Thank you, Julia. I think we can open up the space for questions. We already have a hand raised. 2. Maybe we can collect 2 questions.
Thank you very much. We want to thank Prof. Julia Steinberger, not only because you are a brilliant academic, but you have done something else. You have done that step forward we need in the academic world and in science. And you have been acting knowing the situation we are facing. So I don't know if you would like to share with us what is your role within the climate movements which we are doing non-violent civil disobedience. Thank you for that.
Yeah, let's group a couple of questions.
It's a question for both. France has just adopted a strategy for adapting to a rise of 4 degrees by the end of the century. What do you think about it?
Okay, maybe we can start with Julia with the first question.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that question. I'm just going to be completely honest. I find myself in a situation where I'm learning a lot more about the structures that we're facing, not just like capitalism or neoliberal economics, but I'm also thinking about who we're actually up against in terms of these specific lobbies, their specific strategies, how they are in the media, how they've been responding to the student occupations of universities, for Palestine, for instance. And I've been very happy and proud and relieved, in fact, to be part of Extinction Rebellion and Scientist Rebellion and participate in protests and nonviolent civil disobedience to the extent that I was able to. I think I got a lot of credit for not doing very much, to be completely honest. But I am not completely sure that these tactics are the winning ones, and that's causing me trouble right now. I absolutely believe that they are justified, that they are part of democracy, that they are part of a normal, healthy, functioning democracy. I'm just not completely sure that this is how we win anymore. So that's just, I am ignorant. So I'll just be honest about that.
What about France?
Yes, I get to France. If I can intervene just briefly
Yes,
on the previous
okay.
point, because there is one element that I think is important and is connected to what I was saying at the beginning. In a sense, you make a peace with your enemy. And there is something that about crossing the divide and reaching out to the rest of the people who at the moment are not sharing what seems to be the consensus in this room about climate. And finding ways of having a narrative, and this goes back to the user engagement or the engagement with society that you were talking about, Julia. For me, finding a way of being relevant and answering those questions, that maybe are a difficult question, but in many cases a genuine question, I think it's really key to, and it could be part of, to use your words, part of the strategy to win somehow, if you want. On the adaptation, well, in a sense, 4 degrees is a bit on the high side of what we do expect by the end of the century. At the same time, I think it represents an attempt that is in the right direction. So we do know that climate is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and as I was showing before, is already here. And so something we need to act on immediately, in my opinion, and make a societal priority is adaptation. So if you look at what's happening in Europe, in the 94% of European countries, there has been an increase in the heat-related mortality of the order of 30%. This observation is not a reconstruction. It's happening now. If you see what's happening at the moment, last week, in Saudi Arabia, where 50 people have died during the pilgrimage because of the heat wave, or what might happen in India or in the wet tropics because of heat waves, these are things that are very likely to happen. So making climate adaptation a societal priority, I think from my point of view, I think something that makes a lot of sense. Now, discussing on exactly what was done in a certain country with respect to another, I think this is part of the national discussion.
Great. I think we have time for another round of questions. Wow. Please, Christ, help me. I mean, yeah, there is Alice there, then there is Juan.
Okay. Yes, can you hear me?
Fine.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much for your presentations or dialogue. I don't know whether it's more of a comment or a question, but I'll try to pose it anyway. So my question about the role of science in society is about what happens when science tends to overshadow its own ignorance and present itself as an establishment where ignorance is not a topic, and where the ignorant are the people. And something that I'm observing within controversies, especially around techno-scientific objects, is the fact that there is an impossibility of a genuine dialogue, because science is kind of projecting ignorance on other people without understanding that some questions are
social, political questions rather than matters of ignorance, of not knowing what the science is about. And also, scientists within their own discourse really recognize their own ignorance, but they don't show it to the other people. So I guess the question there is how also to build a different culture where scientific doubts and uncertainty can be recognized as a strength for democratic dialogue around science, technoscience, and the objectives that we have socially.
Okay, maybe give... I think next to you there was somebody there, yeah, and then other people. Sorry, we cannot ask. Okay.
Yeah, very briefly, 2 questions. Thank you, both of you, for your incredible work. The first one would be, if we are looking at sea surface temperature and Antarctic ice extent and air surface temperature, and everything we've seen is worse than expected, no? And there's like a hot topic now, which is like the oceanic currents, the AMOC, which is a debate that is being having the scientific community. So I want to ask you if you think that this topic of the AMOC needs to be approached with bravely, no? With courage, with brave. No? And the other question is if we are looking to the climate issues and we are seeing this kind of worse than expected phenomenon that is repeating itself, if this is happening also with the transition, with the energy transition, that we are like being told that it's fantastic, that it would be very nice and green hydrogen, and what we're seeing is also that it's worse than expected, the development of that transition.
Okay, maybe just a very quick answer, and then we will allow, because there are so many people, so many hands raised, so I want to give the opportunity to very quick answer, and then we do the last round of questions.
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, I love the question about ignorance, and I mean, it resonates a lot with me and my presentation. I think it's something we don't celebrate enough, and I think it should be at the forefront of being...
This is STS.
Of being, well, there you are, the Tartan Society of Scotland. For me, it should be really part of speaking as a scientist in the public discussion. We should say we don't know, and it shouldn't be portrayed as we have the truth and you are the ignorant that we need to as it often does. So I agree completely, and in my job I try to shift a bit in that direction, in making clear that in a sense it's always a conditional statement, and this actually applies quite nicely with the AMOC. So if you look what the IPCC in the 6th assessment report said about AMOC, said, well, the AMOC is this massive oceanic current that transports heat from the tropics to the pole, and it has the downward branch in the North Atlantic, and there is a risk with climate change for this big circulation to slow down and stop. The assessment by the IPCC, which is to consider, I try to go as fast as I can, consider all the literature available, is that this is a possibility, but it's considered low likelihood at this stage. And this was 4 years ago. Now, since then, there have been 3-4 papers that have challenged that approach. And in a sense, in a Bayesian mindset, this is shifting a bit our probability. And that's my thinking behind. So we are still ignorant. We have a little more dots in that equation, and we should slowly indicating the fact that maybe things are slightly worse than we thought. One final point, I don't think necessarily what we are seeing is a worsening, and for me, as is important to celebrate the ignorance, it's also important to celebrate the fact that collectively, the effort we put in climate modeling, in climate observation, has allowed us to give us good guidance of what we are seeing now 20 or 30 years ago.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
I do want to say something about the science versus ignorance. I think that one of the things that we have to take into account in that conversation is disinformation. And the fact that a lot of the critiques of technology are over-influenced by certain actors who might or might not care about, things like peer-reviewed publication and checking their numbers and so on. In particular, being in the French-speaking world, it's absolutely wild. You guys have no idea. There's all sorts of wild conspiracies that you don't find here, just because there's a couple of French-speaking people who decided to make their bread and butter out of sharing really sort of wild stuff. And I think that we need to also communicate that we can't have an honest conversation about this kind of stuff if we don't have the kind of scientific literacy around, you know, peer review, transparency, reproducibility, like actually checking this kind of stuff as well.
Thank you. Last round of questions. There are so many, so we are going to take only two, you and another.
So I already have the microphone, so thanks for giving me the floor. So my name is Amelie, and I work for an organization, and I would actually really also like to ask a similar question as you just did, Julia. Who actually knows ecolease? Okay. That's great. That's not so many people, actually, and I think that's also quite problematic because we are not only not aware of the actors who are hindering the change and are fueling a system that is destructive and ruining lives across the world, but we are also not seem to be aware of the networks, the movements of change that are already building a world that we want to build together, and that this community is actually quite aware of in different ways. I've seen so many different research projects that have highlighted the potential of communities, of sufficiency-based lifestyle changes, of cooperative models. It's also part of your research, as far as I understand, of the Real Deal project, that you want to identify these actors of change. So I just wonder what could be the role of science in empowering existing social movements and networks and collaborating more closely together so that we give them a similar importance and weight as we do to the scientific community. Thank you.
Thanks. Last question. Wow. Self-managed, guys, I know. Autonomy.
Which one?
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. What I would like to say is a comment and also an invitation, especially for Julia to respond. It has to do with the questioning of the role of the university and of science in society, and how that contributes to undermine democracy. From what I perceive, it's not only university and science as we know it that is being questioned. It's the role of the scientists and the humanity of the scientist in itself. Those of you who follow pop culture might have noticed that in the last decades there has been a huge wave of movies, of series and so on, which have been portraying scientists or people who are interested in science as uncool, socially unskilled, and people that you don't want to associate with, and even less become one of them. I have the impression that I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but somehow I sense that this is kind of on purpose, in order not only to undermine the legitimacy of science, but also to undermine the social role of the scientists, and to decrease the incentive for many young people to become scientists, so that science as an instrument of democratic dialogue will be taken less seriously. I would like to ask you, Julia, to comment on this, on the role of popular culture and the role of certain technology like AI, which seems to be purposely directed to decrease human creativity and decrease the capacity for dialogue. Thanks.
Thank you a lot. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to give everybody the opportunity to make questions, but our speakers will be here, will be around, and so feel free to engage with them. I just want to remember that there will be a party with music, rock music, tonight at 9, and then those who will remain until midnight, we will have this queimada, that is this tradition sorcery with alcohol. So I invite everybody to stay here. Before that, we have another event. We will talk about energy transition, climate change. It will be in Spanish with eminent scholars as well. So if you speak Spanish, you are more than welcome. They will be here in this place at 6 p.m. Now, last quick answer from the speakers.
I'm one of the uncool scientists, so I don't know enough about popular culture to be able to answer that, I'm afraid. So, except that I recognize myself in the uncool, geeky part. That's fine with me, I guess. In terms of the civil society actors and social movements, I think that we would like to be able to engage more as a community. I think that some of us are in these movements and are trying to engage. I just wanted to but it's also hard. Like when you're running a research project, when you're running a research group, you have like, even with all the help in the world, there's just so much stuff going on that we don't have a huge amount of capacity for that. And so I'd just like to ask for some understanding there, because we just literally do not have the capacity to respond, to engage in the way that we would like to. And so I'm sure that there are a lot of missed opportunities, but at some level we're just scrambling. Yeah. That was it for me.
Carlo?
Yeah, I think I forgot the question now. No, on this last point on the popular culture, I think there is an element there, and maybe an element worth reflecting. Not so much in terms of conspiracy, but in terms of the collective imagination on who a scientist is and what their role in society is. And I don't think it's necessarily all negative. It depends a bit on the country, depends on the specific context. And there have been some cases, actually quite iconic scientists who have dedicated their life to communication and engagement, have actually made a huge impact on the community. Yeah, there you are.
Okay, so thank you very much, and nothing.
Thank you.